I would say that they have to focus on the defensive side. We know what the offensive side brings you in the potential of Deshaun Watson having a full season. We know what Nick Chubb can produce. We saw what Amari Cooper can do. And obviously, they went and they traded for Elijah Moore. They've been adding weapons slowly to that offense to make it more dynamic. From a defensive standpoint, you have Myles Garrett, you have Denzel Ward, you have some pretty solid pieces to build around. But in terms of focal points, I would say you have to give, I forgot his name for a second, Myles Garrett some help. The Jadeveon Clowney signing did not pan out the way that you thought it would. He is the consistency of an injured player that's always going to miss time. He's probably the equivalent of an Anthony Davis from the NFL because when he's hot, he's hot. When he's available, he's there. But man, when he is out, there's just a massive gape in a hole of that defense. So I would say pass rush is pivotal. I believe they only got 34 sacks this year, middle of the pack for the NFL, but it could be a lot better. You know that Myles Garrett is going to get double and triple teamed, and Jadeveon Clowney did opt out to not come back to the Browns, so they're going to need a second pass rusher, if not a 1-2 combination outside of just Clowney. You got to pressure the quarterback. You got to be able to force turnovers. And then second, also staying on the defensive line, you are going to need to bolster that running attack or that rush defense. I believe they averaged over 130 yards allowed on the ground per game this season, and I believe that was somewhere around 8th or ninth in the league in terms of 8th or ninth worst. They're going to need to find a way to stop the run. We know what their secondary can produce. We know what happens when Myles Garrett can force turnovers. But if you're not able to stop the run, that is going to keep the ball in that opposing team's offensive hands, which is going to keep the ball out of Deshaun Watson's. So bolster that defensive line as a cohesive unit. Add some pass rushers, put some big bodies up front, maybe add some linebacker depth. But again, pass rush defense, got to make improvements because now that Deshaun Watson is available, this is going to be the season the Browns need to capitalize on that AFC North.
And I do think that they have an opportunity to be able to do that. And I think really probably one more area of need that they probably need to focus on with the draft upcoming is probably going to be their offensive line. When it comes to the Browns last year, they were essentially, you could say, a middle of the pack team when it came to the amount of sacks that they gave up. Maybe you could say subpar. That might be a little bit of a stretch. I believe they allowed 42 sacks as a unit last year. And I will say the difference with this season upcoming compared to last year is that when you have Deshaun Watson for potentially a full regular season, I think the dynamics of the offensive line are going to change a little bit simply just because when you look at Deshaun Watson, I understand that he hasn't been the most active quarterback over the last couple of years simply just because of the sexual misconduct allegations that he was going through and the amount of time that he missed. But nonetheless, he is still one of the more athletic quarterbacks in the NFL. And as far as I see it, just based off of pure athleticism, he's probably top 3, top 4 in that department, just off of pure athleticism for the quarterback spot. And if he gets out into open space, he's going to be a nightmare for opposing defenses going up against him. But I think the main thing is this offensive line is going to have to be able to give Deshaun time. And I think if they're able to do that effectively, I think that this Browns offense can flourish. Because when we look at the Browns, I would say general skill players, running back department, wide receivers, tight end, this is a pretty cohesive unit. You've got Nick Chubb out of the backfield. You've got Amari Cooper. You've got Donovan Peoples-Jones. You also have David Njoku. This is a pretty competent offense. But to me, this all starts up in front. If the offensive line for the Browns is winning those one-on-one battles in the trenches, I think they will put themselves in a position to be a much more competitive team in the AFC North. And they're going to have to be. You're contending against teams like the Cincinnati Bengals, who went to an AFC Championship game last year. They've been to back-to-back AFC Championship games. You look at teams like the Ravens. We'll see what happens with the whole Lamar Jackson situation. Maybe the Browns can look at that potential turmoil in Baltimore and take advantage of that going into next year and capitalize on that to potentially be the second best team in the AFC North. I think to me, especially on the offensive side of the ball, I know we overlook it all the time, but really, when it comes to these offensive battles, they're won in the trenches. And if Cleveland's offensive line is able to step up, protect Deshaun effectively, I would say, let's say, cut the sack total from the mid 40s with what they had last year to potentially in the 30s. If they could even get down to the 20s, I think that would be fantastic for Deshaun, because I think he'd have much more time to work with. But if they continue to open up run lanes for Nick Chubb, I think this offense can really get its rhythm, find a consistent rhythm, and potentially become a contender in the division. Contender in the AFC, I'm not 100% sold on that. I would have to see it to believe it. And I'd have to see the Browns get on a pretty consistent stretch before I would come to that point. But overall, I definitely see the ingredients are there for the Browns to take advantage of. But I think if they're smart, try to bolster this offensive line, maybe go into the draft and potentially draft some offensive linemen, and we'll see where it goes from there. But overall, I think the Browns are in a stable situation compared to where they've been pretty much my entire life, which has been a subpar team to be flat out awful. And honestly, I think if they're able to solidify the offensive line, I think they'll definitely have some good things going for them going into next year.